My name is George. I was born in Iowa. I grew up among hammers, nails, and silence. I've spent my life building things: houses, family, business, and I thought I had built something solid indoors too. But tell me, what would you do if on any given afternoon you saw your wife's car parked at your son-in-law's house and hear her saying that you are an old fool who will sign everything without even realizing it? I know, it sounds like something from a soap opera, but I lived, and I heard it with my own ears. A laugh that once enchanted me one day now sounding like a knife in my chest. It wasn't the scream that hurt. It was the tone of contempt, the plan, the coldness. Maybe you felt it too, that twinge deep in your chest that warns you that something is wrong, but you hesitate because you trust too much, and trust the wrong people. If you've ever given everything for someone and still felt like you've been used, this story is for you. Today I'm going to tell you the day my world turned to silence. But not just any silence. A silence that heard everything. And he recorded it, because that's how my justice begins. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. Not all silence is weakness. Sometimes, silence is just the place where pain turns into strategy. I was standing there outside when I heard my wife laughing with my son-in-law, and it was in that laughter that my marriage died. "The old fool will sign everything," she said, and he responded as if he had already won. But little did they know I was there, recording, feeling each word descend like lead in my chest. I know I'm not the only one. Many people have trusted too much and been betrayed by those they called family. And if you've also been through something similar, maybe this story will help you understand that it's still possible to react without lowering yourself. If my outburst touches your heart, I ask you, with humility, to leave your like and subscribe here. Not as someone who supports a channel, but as someone who holds the hand of someone who is about to tell the most bitter truth of his life. Because from here there is no turning back, and I need you to listen to the end. It was any ordinary Tuesday. I had finished my shift early at the company, a rare thing for me, and I felt like seeing my daughter, Brianna. She had texted me over the weekend saying that she was stressed about working in the office, and I, as a father, always thought that a good family dinner could solve half of the world's ills. I got in my car and drove to their house in Morningside in Des Moines. I had a simple plan in my head: invite them to dinner at home on Saturday, make that roast that everyone always ordered, and maybe even laugh a little at the old memories. But as soon as I turned the corner of her street, I saw something that made my foot take the accelerator without thinking. Margaret's car, my silver Lexus, was there, standing discreetly, half hidden, leaning against the wall of my son-in-law's house. I blinked. I thought it was a mistake. She was supposedly in Chicago, a meeting with a design gallery, something like that. I remember that she left in a hurry the day before, suitcase ready, quick kiss. I stayed at home, silent, as always. I turned off the engine but stayed inside the car for a while. Do you know when the body stops but the heart keeps moving? The mind begins to assemble scenarios and none of them are good. I looked at the car and tried to understand. Did Brianna know? Did Margaret forget to let me know that she came back early? So many questions, and the silence pushing me forward. I decided to go down. I needed to see it with my own eyes, not out of mistrust, but by a restlessness that was born there without explanation. When you live too long with someone, you feel it, even before you see it, even before I knew it. I walked slowly along the sidewalk, pretending normality. A man visiting his daughter, no big deal. But when I approached the side of the house, I heard laughter, a laugh I knew with my eyes closed. Margaret. Then, Dan's voice. Low, but clear. They were in the living room, and the side window was ajar. The wind was blowing lightly and I heard it. At first it was silly talk, comments about a new restaurant, about someone we know in common, but something in the tone, something in the way they spoke to each other, it gave me goosebumps. I stood there, standing still. The sun was beating down on my neck, but the back of my neck froze, and then she said something that cut me like a knife. He never suspects anything. It's even funny. A man with so much money, so clever in business, but a complete idiot at home. Dan laughed. I felt my stomach turn. I kept my hand in my pocket, squeezing my cell phone, not knowing what to do. And she continued. As soon as he signs the update of the will, we start the process. I've already spoken to the lawyer. It's going to be clean. Clean. She said clean, like someone who talks about removing a stain from a sofa. Not to take everything from a man who shared an entire life with her. Do you know what's worse? It was not the plan. It was natural. The way they talked about me as if I were an old, disposable weight, a contract to be terminated, a name on a piece of paper. I stopped for a moment right there, my heart pounding in my throat, and thought, how do you survive this kind of betrayal? Because it's not just marriage. It's the confidence, the story, the silent dinners after a tiring day, the inside jokes, the way she straightened her tie before an event. All this, thrown away. If you've ever felt this cold that enters inside even on a hot day, tell me in the comments. He writes, I've lived it, or it touched me, because sometimes, just knowing that someone understands, we breathe better. I stood there until I couldn't hear anymore. My body wanted to invade that house. I wanted to scream, but something inside me held on, and today I know. It was my silence preparing to be my greatest weapon. But did my daughter know all this? Or was she also being deceived? The answer to this question almost knocked me down, and that's what I'm going to tell you in the next part, because what came next, it was even harder to bear. As soon as the old fool signs the papers, we have access to everything. She said it like this, without stuttering, without hesitating, without even lowering my voice. I felt like I had been punched in the chest, but I kept standing still. It was then that I understood. I was no longer the husband, the partner, the man she once said she loved. I was just an obstacle in the way, an obstacle that, according to her, would be easily fooled with a smile and a signature. Dan completed with that calculating voice of his, full of legal terms. He spoke of reverse shielding, transfer of assets by proxy, accounts under alternative names. I listened and recorded, and what impressed me most was the naturalness with which they spoke of my possessions, as if I had already left. They laughed. They planned dates. They even commented on which house to sell first. The one on the lake goes fast. It is the most valued. And then she said, after that, he might even keep the old house, the one he never leaves. I understood then that she was talking about our home, the place where we raised our daughter, where we celebrate birthdays, where she planted tulips and I installed a swing. All that for her was now just the old house. I remained motionless with my cell phone recording everything, but inside I was dying, not because I lost what was mine, but because I discovered that it was never ours. I kept remembering the times I stopped traveling to work more, the times I gave up buying something for myself to give to them, and now I was the old fool, the one who pays for everything and doesn't even notice when they pull the rug. But at that moment, right there, standing outside that window, something changed inside me. I was no longer going to be the man who trusted everyone. I was going to be the man who watched in silence, the man who, when he spoke, would already have everything ready. They thought they were dealing with a fool. They forgot that, first of all, I was a builder. I know what it's like to raise something from scratch. And I also know how to demolish a structure, inside precisely. But there was one doubt that gnawed at me. Was Brianna a part of it all? Or was it also being used by them? I needed to know. And what I discovered, it made me question everything I believed about love, family, and loyalty. I left there the same way I arrived, without being seen, without making noise. I walked to my car with heavy legs, as if each step was sinking me into something denser than the asphalt itself. I went in, closed the door slowly, and spent a few seconds staring at nothing through the windshield. The cell phone in my hand was still shaking. 43 minutes of recording. 43 minutes that tore 25 years of life together. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine responded, but I didn't feel anything. No anger, no desire to scream, to confront, to explode. Just an icy, deep pain that seemed to spread through my bones as if it were winter inside me. I took the road back with the radio off. The silence inside the car seemed louder than any music. I watched the Iowa landscape go by, the open fields, the silhouettes of the barns, the worn signs, and all this seemed so familiar to me, but at the same time so distant. It was as if the world had changed color while I was standing there next to that window listening to my wife dismantle me into words. In the middle of the road, a truck overtook me and threw a dry wind in my face. That's when I realized that my eyes were wet. I didn't cry. Alone. Ran. I got home. Parked in the same parking space as always. The late afternoon light was shining on the porch. I entered and was greeted by that thick silence. The smell of her soap was still in the bathroom, the blouse hanging from the kitchen chair, the flowers in the living room vase. Every corner of that house had Margaret's touch. She always had a darn good taste for it. But now, everything seemed fake, as if what was beautiful had become a fake ornament. I walked through the rooms as if revisiting an old dream. I touched the arm of the armchair she loved. I saw the frame of the photo of our wedding on the shelf. We were smiling, me in a light suit, and she in a simple dress but with her eyes shining. That smile, I believed in him. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her closet. It was all there. Lined shoes, lavender-scented dresses, suitcases stacked. And I thought, how can a person who lives with you for so many years hide so much? How do you sleep next to someone for decades? And yet you don't see the betrayal growing in the details? I took out my cell phone, put on the headphones, and played the recording. 43 minutes listening to my own ruin out loud. And I heard it all over again, in one piece, pausing in some parts, paying attention to the tone, the words, the pauses between one sentence and another. I didn't want to feel angry. I wanted to understand, but I didn't understand. Nothing justified it. After it was done, I saved the file on a USB stick and stored it inside an old tool can in the basement. My heart was still heavy, but my head, it was beginning to lighten. I wasn't going to tell you anything yet. I wasn't going to confront it, because I learned that whoever shouts loses the right to be heard, and I needed everything to be heard. When the time was right, I went upstairs, lay down in my clothes and everything, and looked at the ceiling as if looking for answers in the cracks. I remembered the young Margaret, from when we still had nothing. I remembered when she said she just needed my presence. And now she wanted my absence in the form of a will. The house was so quiet that I could hear my own pulse. And it was in this silence that I made the first decision. I was not going to fall as they expected. If she wanted a foolish old man, she would have a quiet old man, but not stupid. And before any step, I needed to know the hardest thing. How involved was my daughter in all this? Did she know? Or was she being used too, like me? The answer was closer than I imagined. And when it came, my heart, he almost couldn't stand it. Before all this happened, before I was the old fool she wanted to discard, I was the man she claimed to love, and I believed it. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I met Margaret. It was at a city hall party in 1996. I was there because of a public works bid, dressed in a tight jacket and nervous with so many people in ties. She arrived with that light manner, laughing loudly, a glass of wine in her hand and a presence that lit up everything around. And I was just a sweaty guy trying to build something with an old truck and guts. But she looked at me as if I owned the world. We talked all night. She said that she loved to hear about construction, that she thought it was beautiful when I spoke passionately about the foundations, the beams, the importance of founding a house. She really listened to me, you know? And at that time, that was all I needed. It was with her that I closed my first contracts as a married man. Margaret knew how to talk, convince, impress. She helped me choose ties, review budgets, adjust the tone of emails. We were a team. When Brianna was born, our life became a perfect portrait. She took care of the house, decorated every corner with love, planned birthdays as if they were movie parties. And me, I worked. Very much. I made George's Construction's name appear on the signs of the best homes in Cedar Rapids. I built walls during the day and dreamed about it at night. Our routine was simple. I left early, came back exhausted, and she always waited for me with a hot plate and a kiss on the forehead. There were days when we didn't even talk much, but her presence was enough. We had beautiful trips. I remember our weekend in Nashville where she danced on the hotel balcony just to make me laugh, from candlelit dinners in the living room. When the light went down because of the snow, she lit candles and pretended it was all planned, and I joined in the game, because it was impossible not to love her. For a long time I thought it was forever, but then, things began to change. First came the subtle comments. Did you see the Hendersons' house in Aspen? Brian's wife changed cars again. Then came the invitations to rich people's events, where she shone, and I felt small. She began to be interested in things I couldn't keep up with. Dinners with businessmen from another league, exclusive clubs, trips with friends who had double surnames. Gradually, she moved away. From me, from Brianna, from the house. Breakfast has become silence. Birthdays have lost grace. And when she lay next to me, she no longer said goodnight. I just turned to the side and slept. I felt it, but I didn't say it. Because when we really love, we wait for the other to come back. Let it be just a phase. That the person you met is still there, underneath the layers of distance. But maybe I waited too long. Maybe I loved alone, for too long. And look, I'm here opening my heart, telling my story, unashamed of pain or deception. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you, because if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that people who listen with their hearts are golden. That night, sitting on the edge of the bed with all these memories pressing my chest, I missed what we were, but even more, I felt grief for all that we ceased to be, and it was there, in that silence, that something began to be born inside me. It was not revenge, it was justice. But before I made any moves, I needed an answer. How far was my daughter Brianna involved? Could it be that she... Did you also know? What I discovered later made me look at fatherhood in a new light. And that light, it hurt in my eyes. The next morning I woke up with a heavy body and dry eyes. It didn't even look like I had slept, to tell the truth. I just lay down and stayed there, staring at the dark ceiling until daylight. I got up slowly, made the coffee as I always did for more than 20 years, but it didn't taste like anything. The kitchen was silent, and that silence screamed in me. I walked around the house as if walking in a museum of memories that no longer belong. The couch where Margaret sat to read the gallery catalogs, the blanket she folded every night with care, the cushions she sewed herself when Brianna was little. Everything there seemed to have been placed by her, molded by her, chosen to please her. And now, all that seemed to push me out. It was as if the house was on her side. Each wall seemed to tell me, "You built all this, but it was never yours." I passed through the corridor and stopped in front of the bookshelf in the living room. The frames with our photos were all there. Me with her in Nashville, the three of us at Brianna's graduation. She wore a blue dress on our 15th wedding anniversary. I looked at those frozen smiles and wondered how many of them were sincere, how many of these moments were true and how many were staging. Because now, seeing everything from the outside, it looked like a well-rehearsed play, and I was just the extra who paid for the scenery. I went to the office. I sat in the leather armchair that Margaret said was ugly but comfortable, and stood there. The light came in through the side window and hit the bookshelf, Brianna's framed diplomas, the miniatures of the houses I designed in the past. It was as if every object in that room had been a rung on the ladder they were climbing, and I didn't even notice. I took out my cell phone. The recording was still there, the saved file with date and time. I thought about listening again, but my finger hesitated about the screen. I knew what was there. I had already heard it once, but there was something in me that I still wanted to pretend it wasn't real, that maybe I had misunderstood, that maybe it was all a misunderstanding, but it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The silence between those sentences, her laughter, the way he said, "It's going to be clean," that is not invented. That is naked cruelty, cruelty with elegance, which is even worse. And it was at that time that I felt something strange, desire to leave, from my house. From the place that I myself lifted with my own hands, a place that was born from my work, my effort, my sacrifices. But now he seemed to expel me, because when the truth invades your life, even the air you breathe changes its smell. I went to the back garden. I sat on the wooden bench where I used to have tea with Margaret on Sundays. I looked at the backyard. She had lavender planted there. He said that the smell calmed the mind, but now all I felt was an emptiness, a silence that hurt more than any scream. I felt as if the entire empire I had built had been used against me. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every detail, everything designed with my sweat, but now turned to take away what was left of me. And at that moment a thought hit me that I had never had before. Could it be that her love for me, was it ever real? Or was it that from the beginning I was just a good investment? This doubt corroded me inside, like an invisible termite in a wooden structure. I was alone, for the first time, truly alone inside my own home. And perhaps that was the lowest moment of my entire life. Not when I lost my parents, not when I almost went bankrupt in the 2000s. No pain could compare to this, because this one didn't come from outside. It came from the chest. It came from the one I let in. But it was in this void that a seed began to germinate. An idea, a simple question, but one that changed everything. What if I do nothing? What if I just watch? What if I let them continue to think they're fooling the old fool? Could it be that silence cannot be my greatest strength? But first of all, I needed to know, what does Brianna know? Is she just a daughter, or has she also become an accomplice? And the answer would come faster than I expected. She arrived home around 8 in the morning. with her hair tied up in a loose bun and her face tired from someone who had spent the night out. He entered as someone returning from any routine. He dropped his bag on the sideboard at the entrance, took that long sigh and said, "Chicago was chaos. You can't imagine the traffic." And he smiled. That smile that years ago was what gave me peace after a busy day. Now that same smile was what made me sick. I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read the newspaper. The smell of the coffee she was brewing filled the house, and everything seemed normal. So normal that it hurt, because I knew her every gesture, every word, was now a staging. And the worst, she didn't even suspect that I already knew the entire script. She came to me, put her hand on my shoulder, said, "I prepared it the way you like it." And I thanked him. Smile. I took the first sip like someone who takes poison in slow motion. I asked how the trip had been, how the customers were, the hotel, the restaurant she said she wanted to visit. She made it all up. Everything. She said she closed a deal with a new gallery, that she had dinner with a curator who was exhausted from so many meetings. I just nodded, looking at the cup, as if listening to the news. Inside, my soul was gnawing. I saw every detail. The way she stirred the sugar, how she crossed her legs, how she spoke fast so as not to leave room for questions. It was all a theater. But this time the audience was me, and I already knew the ending. After breakfast, she went upstairs to take a shower. I continued in the kitchen with the newspaper in my hands and the world spinning in my head. When she left, she said she was going to the supermarket and that she might stop by the flower shop to see some new orchids. I got up slowly and said in the calmest voice I could find, "Oh, don't worry about the card, see? I updated the limits yesterday." She smiled, thanked me, gave me a kiss on the cheek and left. He didn't even notice the poison hidden in that sentence, because there in that small gesture I made it clear to myself that the tables had turned, and she didn't even see it. Funny, we spend our lives thinking that love protects, that he is a shield. But sometimes love is what makes you more exposed, because we let our guard down for those we love, and when that someone hurts you, it hurts where no one else can touch. You know, if you've made it this far in my story, I ask you, stay with me until the end, because what lies ahead, it's what changed my life forever. I stayed in that house the rest of the day as a shadow, touching the furniture, looking at the paintings, trying to understand how it all could look so calm on the outside, while inside everything was in ruins. In the evening, she returned smiling with flowers in her hands, white orchids, her favorites. He said they were on sale, that I would love the arrangement she was thinking of putting together. I just smiled, but while she was talking about the flowers, I thought of something else. I thought, does she smile like that when she talks to him? Does she lie like that to anyone else? Or was I just a successful rehearsal? It was on that night that I decided it was no longer time to feel. It was time to act, but calmly, with the silence, she taught. It is with precision that I learned by building houses for 40 years. But before any movement, something happened. A call, one sentence, and a voice that I didn't expect to hear like that. That's when everything started to get out of control. After that night, I realized that I could no longer live between pretense and pain. Love, when it dies, leaves a different silence. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of certainty. And I was sure of what I heard, what I saw, what she was now. So that morning, before the sun even rose, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and started writing down names, dates, and bills. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I would have to do what I have always done best. Plan. When the world collapses, we rebuild. But this time, the foundation had to be within me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Marcus, my accountant for more than 20 years. He answered with that calm voice of someone who has seen me in every moment of my life. "George, is everything okay there?" I just replied, "I need you. Tomorrow morning. Urgent matter." He didn't ask questions, he just said he would be there. Then I called Sarah, my old lawyer, a woman who always respected me, who helped me when the company started and who knew exactly what kind of man I was. She was silent for a moment, then replied, "Sure, George. Do you want me to come to you?" I accepted. I hung up and stared at my phone, as if that small object was now my only weapon. The house was still asleep, and the clock was 6 in the morning. Margaret must have been having coffee at her daughter's house or perhaps in some cafe in the city, dressed in elegance and lies. I there, surrounded by old papers, yellowed contracts and souvenirs, began to separate everything. I pulled folders from the shelf, opened drawers, rummaged through boxes that I no longer remembered existed. Tax returns, certificates, articles of association, everything I had ever built was there. It was like seeing my own life on paper, every number, every signature, every scratch. And it was there, among documents and dust, that the anger became the focus. While I was organizing, a memory crossed me. It was 2008, the year of the real estate crisis. Many went broke. I also almost broke. But at that time, it was Margaret who told me, "You know how to start over. That's what you do." Funny. Now I was starting over again. Only this time, it was from her that I needed to protect myself. And I knew how to do it. I was the man who built houses that resisted tornadoes. And now I was going to come up with a plan that would resist the lie. I took the pen drive where I saved the recording and looked at it for a few seconds. It seemed too small to carry so much weight. But there was everything, the voices, the evidence, the intentions. I kept it in the safe behind the board in the living room, the same safe where I kept the will and company documents. No one knew he existed, neither did she. Around 10, Marcus arrived, the same suit as always, an attentive look, a man who doesn't say what he shouldn't. I greeted him with a firmer handshake than usual. "Sit." He opened his laptop. I pushed the folders at him and said, "I need to review everything. I want to know exactly what's in my name, what's in the company name, and what's in the company." He looked at me, intrigued, but didn't ask why. He only replied, "We will review item by item." Sarah arrived an hour later. She came in with that direct way of hers, bluntly. I explained little, enough for her to understand that there was something serious. She looked at me and said, "George, if it's what I'm imagining, let's work it out. But he promises me that he will keep calm." I just shook my head. While they worked, I watched the movement. It was strange to see two people trying to organize the chaos of my life, and at the same time, reassuring. Because for the first time in weeks I was doing something. And doing something for me has always been synonymous with breathing. In the afternoon, Marcus showed me the first analyses. Some assets were jointly registered, others under the company's CNPJ. And that's when I realized what Margaret and her son-in-law wanted, they couldn't get it so easily. I had left a lot of things protected by instinct, but now it was time to reinforce. I asked Sarah to review the prenuptial agreement, the succession clauses, the investments, everything. She asked, "Are you thinking about separation?" I replied, "Not yet. I'm thinking about getting ready." I watched the two of them while they worked. Marcus typed fast. Sarah reviewed documents carefully. I, quietly, felt the blood boiling inside. But it was a controlled, cold fire like that of a forge. I knew that from then on, each step had to be calculated. Every word, measure. At one point I looked out the window. The sky was clear, the sun was beating hard. And I thought of something that accompanied me the rest of the day. When love becomes a threat, we learn to walk in silence. Because noise only helps those who want to see you stumble. No, there are things in life that we don't forget, and there are others that we need to learn to remember without hurting. I'm trying to learn that now. If you've ever been through something similar, that moment when you realize you need to pull yourself together without letting it show, tell me in the comments. He writes, "I understand you," or "I know how it is." Sometimes, the pain is lighter when we share it with those who also feel it. At the end of the day, they left. The house was quiet again. I sat on the couch and stared at nothing. Deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning, the first brick of the reconstruction. And somehow, I felt that fate was about to deliver me something even crueler, or perhaps more liberating, because the next day, an unexpected truth knocked on my door, and she came with my daughter's name. That night, I sat in the office and stared at the computer screen for long minutes. The house was silent, the same silence that had weighed me down before. Now it began to protect me. I took the cup of coffee, already cold, and took the first step. I changed the passwords, one by one. Joint accounts, company access, credit cards. I did everything calmly, methodically, and patiently. 3 things I learned by building houses. Those who are in a hurry get the measure wrong. I couldn't go wrong now. The first move of my counterattack had to be invisible. Not a breakup, a restructuring. I spent the whole night reviewing documents, analyzing statements, checking contract lines that no one had looked at for years. I discovered small breaches that could become walls. And there, alone, I realized that my pain was becoming something new. Strategy. The betrayal still burned, but in place of the anger, a strange, almost serene coldness grew. It was the same kind of calm that precedes a storm. The next morning I had everything prepared. Frozen cards, limited access to accounts, transfers reviewed. Margaret left early as usual, saying that she was going to settle some compromises. A nice word to hide anything. I just nodded, watching every gesture, every look. When the door closed behind her, I finally took a deep breath. I went to the safe and took the pen drive. I checked to see if the file was still there. Her voice and Dan's. Clear, raw, merciless. It was my shield, my proof. I kept it again. I knew the game was just beginning. Hours later, my cell phone rang. It was her, his voice soft, slightly irritated. George, did something happen to the card? I tried to use it in the downtown boutique and it was refused. Have you tried to see with the bank? I took a deep breath, let the silence weigh down a little on the other end of the line and replied, "It must be system. I'll check." She laughed lightly and said, "Okay, honey. Let me know when you solve it." And he hung up. I was looking at my cell phone for a while. That call was the snap, the first sign that she was beginning to feel the ground give way. But I still didn't suspect anything, and I wanted it to stay that way. The man she thought she was manipulating was, for the first time, one step ahead. At night when she returned, I noticed a certain discomfort. I tried to disguise it, but I was different. He was playing with his cell phone all the time, exchanging quick messages, his frown. I was in the armchair in the living room reading the newspaper as I always did. She looked at me and asked, "Did you talk to the bank?" I replied without taking my eyes off the page. "Yes, it looks like it was a system update. It should normalize tomorrow." She nodded, but did not answer. He went up to the bedroom and locked the door. I stood there motionless, listening to the sound of her footsteps upstairs. I thought about everything we experienced, and how two people can share a life and suddenly become strangers within the same house. And I realized something simple, but it hit me hard. Love may even end, but respect for yourself needs to be reborn, or you die with it. That night I slept little. I got up before sunrise and started to write down what I still needed to adjust. Update scriptures. Review insurance. Reorganize the company's investments. It was strange, but that routine gave me peace. It was as if each practical action tore off a piece of pain and transformed it into strength. Margaret went out again in the morning and I watched from the window. She walked in a hurry, the same perfume as always, the same appearance of someone who controls everything. Little did she know that her castle was already beginning to collapse, stone by stone. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. He only said, "The first phase is ready." She understood. On the other side, he replied in a firm voice, "Keep the pace, George. They still think they are in charge. Let it think so." I hung up and smiled, for the first time in a long time. A small smile, almost imperceptible but true. Later, I went to the backyard. The sun was beating down weakly, and the wind was smelling of the lavenders she had planted years ago. I sat on the wooden bench and stood there staring at nothing. I thought about how time has a cruel way of showing who really is who. And there, in the middle of that calm afternoon, I knew I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to stand firm until the end. But life has a curious way of testing who begins to rise. That same week, something happened. A small detail, almost insignificant, but which completely changed the course of things. A message sent to the wrong person. An oversightful mistake. And that's when I realized that silence sometimes speaks louder than any confession. The next morning, I woke up different. He was no longer that man crushed by the weight of betrayal. It was another. A man who learned to use silence as a weapon. And that Tuesday was the day I stopped being the betrayed one and started being the strategist. I went to Sarah's office in downtown Cedar Rapids. The city woke up slowly, the noise of trucks mixed with birdsong and the cold Iowa wind. I entered calmly, and she was already waiting for me with 2 cups of hot coffee. Marcus arrived a few minutes later with his usual black briefcase under his arm. Neither of them knew what I was about to say. I sat down in front of them and started slowly. "Sarah, Marcus, I need you to know that this is going to seem absurd, but it's true. My wife and son-in-law are planning a financial scam against me." They looked at each other, as if trying to process a sentence that seems impossible. So I took the flash drive from my pocket and put it on the table. It's all here. The plan, the details, even the way they intend to destroy me. I recorded it. Sarah stood still, and Marcus, after a heavy silence, said only, "George, are you sure you want to hear that again?" I shook my head. "I've heard it, and I will never forget it. But now, I want them to feel what it's like to lose control. I gave them the instructions calmly, as if describing a construction plan. First, shield George's construction. Everything that is in the name of the company, reinforce. Transfer holdings to holding companies. Review contracts with succession clauses. Second, track every penny moved in the last 12 months. I want to know where it went, who signed, who authorized it. Third, update the prenuptial agreement. It may be old, but it is not useless. Sarah looked at me as if she were seeing a new man being born, and maybe that was it. Marcus wrote everything down without looking up, but I could see that he understood. Do you want me to set up the transfers discreetly? He asked. I want them to look like routine reviews. Sarah crossed her arms. George, this can cause banking noise and Margaret will notice. I took a deep breath. She has already realized what she wanted. Now it's my turn to let her believe in what I want. We spoke for more than 2 hours. When we finished, Sarah closed the briefcase and said, You're aware that if this is discovered too early, the game changes sides. I gave a half smile. I built houses in the midst of hurricanes, Sarah. I know the value of time and silence. And I know what happens to those who rush the concrete. She understood. Marcus, too. As they prepared the measurements, I remembered something Margaret used to say. Elegance is in never raising your voice. Well, I was going to win with the same elegance she used to lie. In silence. That afternoon I returned home and went straight to the office. I turned on the computer, reviewed my notes, and realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The pain was still there, but it no longer overwhelmed me. It was as if the pain had become the cement that held everything up. With each click, with each digital signature, I felt that I was rebuilding not only my assets, but my dignity. You know, sometimes we spend a lifetime believing that protecting others is the same as protecting ourselves, but it is not. Sometimes, to save yourself, you need to let collapse what you once swore to uphold. And if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. In the late afternoon, I received a call from Marcus. George, I found something curious. Small but frequent transfers from the joint account to a savings account in Daniel Thompson's name. My heart tightened. Since when? I asked. 8 months. Almost $50,000 in total. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear her laughter echoing again. As soon as the old fool signs the papers, I thanked him, asked for discretion, and hung up. I stood there, staring out the office window, the sun setting behind the trees in the backyard. The world looked the same, the birds chirping, the gentle wind, but inside me nothing else was the same. Margaret thought she was preparing to destroy me, but she didn't realize that the ground was already beginning to give way under her own feet. The silent cleansing, as I came to call it, was underway, and the more I discovered, the clearer the picture became. She had not only betrayed me, she had studied me. Every step, every signature, every carelessness of mine was written down, calculated, used. But she made a mistake, the same one everyone makes when they underestimate a silent man. And it was in that silence that I discovered something that would change everything. A name, a document, a hidden clue in the midst of transfers. And with it, the proof that the betrayal was much greater than I imagined. Marcus arrived early that Friday. He had a serious face, a heavy step, as someone who carries a truth that he preferred not to say. When he sat down in front of me and opened the briefcase, I felt that something inside me already knew. George, I did the full tracking of the accounts. Everything you asked for. He took a folded sheet from the middle of the papers, placed it on the table and pushed it towards me. The numbers screamed without making a sound. The total, $52,417, transferred from the joint account, in small amounts, over 8 months. The destination, a savings account in the name of Daniel Thompson, my son-in-law, the same man to whom I gave my daughter at the altar. I stared at those numbers for so long that the lines started to blur. Each amount has a date, a statement, a receipt. There is no doubt, said Marcus, his voice firm. And the most curious, George, the expenses do not match Margaret's standard. She has never used this type of movement. It seems that I was feeding something, or someone. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined the scenes. The two of them sitting in an expensive restaurant, laughing, toasting with wine paid for with the money I was sweating to earn. It was a strange, cold pain, without screaming, the kind of pain that doesn't cause a scandal, but that hurts you inside, like ice cracking. I picked up another document and saw the descriptions. resort dinners, luxury store shopping, hotel stays. All while I worked 15 hours a day to support a house that no longer belonged to me in feeling. They did it under my roof, Marcus. And I didn't see anything. He nodded slowly. They're not just cheating on you, George. They're using you. And from what I've been researching, Dan is deep in debt. Late office rent, outstanding student loans, 3 formal complaints to the American Bar Association for financial misconduct. That made me get up from my chair. I walked to the window and stared at the street, trying to understand where I failed to see what was right in front of my eyes. He seemed so confident, so stable. Muttered. Marcus replied calmly. Men like that learn to look like what they are not. Luxury is just a curtain, George. And from what I can see, Margaret believed in the show. I looked at the reflection of the glass. An aged man with a tired face, but with something different in his eyes. I no longer saw only pain, via purpose. So that's it. They are in debt, and thought I would be salvation. But they forgot that the house they tried to tear down was built by me, and I know where all the pillars are. Marcus closed his briefcase and nodded. What are you going to do now? I took a deep breath, remained silent, and let each one sink under their own weight. That afternoon I sat in the office and flipped through the reports. Every expense felt like an insult. A new piece of jewelry, an $800 dinner, a hotel night that cost what a bricklayer earned in a week. And to think that, in the meantime, Margaret was complaining about the price of gasoline, the renovation of the kitchen, the tuition of her grandson's school. Everything was calculation. Everything was manipulation. No, there's a moment in life when the penny drops for good, when the love you gave turns into an account number, and respect becomes a digital signature. And it is at this moment that we realize that not every marriage ends with a fight. Some end up with spreadsheets. I looked at the ceiling and thought, if I'm going through this after 25 years, maybe someone on the other side of the screen has also felt this cold betrayal, which doesn't come with screaming, but with silence and document. And if you've been through this, please stay with me until the end of this story, because what's next? It will show you that justice can be silent, but it never stops coming. Over the next few days, I started putting the pieces together. I found out that Dan owed almost $200,000 in loans, that his office, that building with a glass and marble facade, was just appearance. And what supported everything, including my wife's lifestyle, was the money that came out of our joint accounts. I was the foundation they planned to demolish. With each new discovery, my contempt grew. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Because all of a sudden I understood the kind of people I was dealing with. They didn't just want the money, they wanted control. They wanted to see me beg. But I wasn't going to give that pleasure to any of them. I talked to Sarah. I showed the evidence. She was silent for a while and then said, George, this is more than marital betrayal. This is a crime. And if you allow me, I can guarantee them that by the time they realize what they've lost, it's too late. Agreed. But slow down, Sarah. They think they are in charge. Let the illusion continue. I returned home at dusk. Margaret was in the living room talking on the phone, feigning sweetness, laughing with that tone that once enchanted me. He saw me at the door and smiled, hanging up quickly. Hi, love. Was the day tiring? I replied with the same tone as always. It was productive, and as she hugged me, I could only think, if she knew what I know, she would have started running by now. That night, I lay down next to her, the same pillow, the same roof, the same perfume, but a chasm between us. I closed my eyes and swore silently. They were going to learn that the man they called a fool was, in fact, the one who had always held the reins of everything. And the first piece of that board was going to fall very soon. Because the next morning, a call from Brianna would change everything again. Brianna's call woke me up early. Her voice was different, shaky, insecure. Dad, Mom is strange. You keep asking me things about you, about what you've been doing. And the other day he insinuated that you walked too far, that maybe you're in some trouble. I was silent for a moment, trying to digest it. She continued, I don't understand, Dad. She speaks as if he was trying to convince me of something. I took a deep breath and just said, Don't worry, daughter. Sometimes people create stories when they can no longer live their own truths. She didn't answer, but I felt on the other end of the line that my silence said more than any explanation. After I turned it off, I stood still for a long time, staring at nothing. The air felt heavier, as if every wall of the house had heard the conversation. It was there that I decided. I needed to see with my own eyes what Margaret did when I was not at home. Not to confront, but to understand the size of the hole where she was throwing me. Late that morning, I quietly installed a small camera in the office, an old piece of equipment I used to monitor construction sites from a distance. I left it hidden among the books, pointed to the table. I connected to my cell phone and left, pretending to have a meeting at the construction company. That afternoon, I was parked on the back street, watching the images that arrived live on my cell phone. Margaret entered the office at about 2:30. He had a cup of coffee and his cell phone in his other hand. He sat in my chair and started going through the computer folders. I typed fast, looked at my cell phone, took pictures of the screen. Each click was a silent stab. I've seen her open contract files, company spreadsheets, client documents, everything she should never have accessed. And as I watched, a mixture of pain and unbelief seized me. At one point, she answered a call. "Yes, Dan. He doesn't suspect anything. I have everything we need, just one thing is missing." She paused and lowered her voice. "Brianna is starting to suspect, but I can bring her to our side. She trusts me. If I say that the father is unbalanced, she believes, it will seem easier to justify the divorce." I froze. The blood seemed to stop in the veins. That woman, the mother of my daughter, was planning to destroy me with her bare hands, and she would still use the girl as a shield. It was there that I understood. The love that remained between us was not just dead, it was dangerous. I put my cell phone aside and leaned my head against the steering wheel. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed like I could hear the sound. I always knew that human beings are capable of lying, but I never imagined that someone could lie looking into the eyes of those who shared their lives. And it's funny, there are memories that don't pass, even when we want to. They stand there throbbing, asking to be remembered. Sometimes I think that time doesn't erase, it archives, and when it opens again, it hurts as if it were the first time. If you've ever had a memory like this which seems to insist on coming back, tell me in the comments, share with me. Perhaps sharing these memories is the only way to not let them break us inside. That night, I watched the images again. Every detail, every calculated gesture of hers. I needed to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And it was. When it was finished, I turned off the monitor and sat in the dark. The heavy breathing, the sound of the clock ticking the seconds, and the certainty that I could no longer just defend myself. If she started spreading lies about me, especially involving our daughter, the damage would be irreversible. I took the flash drive with the previous recording and copied the new video. I kept the two together, inside a sealed envelope, in the office safe, and I wrote on the cover, in firm letters, "When the truth needs to speak." Their plan was now clear. First to weaken myself financially, then emotionally, and finally destroy my reputation with the help of my own daughter. It was the kind of scam that could only have been designed by someone who knew me deeply. Margaret knew where I was most vulnerable, and she aimed there. But what she didn't know was that this time I had also learned to play. I wasn't going to react angry. He was going to react with evidence. Take it easy, with the kind of precision she would never understand. Over the next few days, she began to behave differently. Sweeter, closer. He asked subtle questions. "Have you been feeling well? I've been thinking that we could sell the house and start over somewhere else. You trust me, don't you, George?" And I, with a firm heart, always answered the same. "Of course you do, Margaret." But inside, I already knew. That was her face when she lied. And I could also imagine her face when he began to plead. Because the truth sooner or later comes out. And when it came, it didn't take me by surprise. But the way it all happened, no one could predict. I still remember the feeling of that day, as if it were now. The cold morning air, the noise of cars on Washington Street, the sound of my own steady footsteps echoing in the hallway of the building where Dan worked. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something deeper, more calculated. After everything I discovered, I knew that silence would be my sharpest weapon. I wore the same jacket I wore to important meetings, the one she had bought for me years ago, and I went. The receptionist smiled as soon as she saw me. "Mr. George, Dr. Thompson is in attendance, but I can tell you that you have arrived," I said calmly. "No need, honey. I hope." I sat in the leather armchair, watching the walls covered with certificates and graduation photos. Everything there looked impeccable, like the facade of a freshly painted building hiding cracks growing inside. After a few minutes, the door opened. Dan showed up with that same rehearsed smile that always annoyed me. "George, what a good surprise. Want a coffee?" I shook his hand and said, "I do. I came to talk about the donation contract for Brianna. Just a few details." He nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. The secretary brought the coffee, and we sat across from each other. The first half hour was a theater of cordialities. We talked about the weather, about his grandson, about the new venture that he said was going from strength to strength, but I could see the signs, the restless look, the sweat starting to pile up on my forehead, the way he banged his pen against the table. That man, so full of confidence at family parties, now cowered under my calm. When the silence began to weigh down, I leaned in a little and asked, as if making small talk, "Do you believe in loyalty, Dan?" He looked at me surprised, not understanding the direction of the question. "Of course, George. Loyalty is the basis of everything. In business, in the family, in marriages." I gave a slight smile. "At weddings, yes. I've always thought that too." He fiddled with the cup, avoiding the gaze. "And tell me what," I continued, "how would you deal with a client who hides his wife's assets? It's a crime, isn't it?" He swallowed hard, but kept his tone neutral. "It depends on the context. Each case is different." The sweat ran down the side of his face. It was then that I took the brown envelope out of my pocket and placed it on the table carefully. He looked at it as if it were a bomb about to explode. "What's that?" he asked, forcing a nervous laugh. "Documents," I replied. "Copies of some bank transfers, between Margaret's account and yours." He was speechless, not a word. The air in the office seemed to stop. I saw his jaw muscles contracting, breathing accelerating. He opened the envelope, looked at the papers, and turned white. "I can explain, George." It started, but I raised my hand. "You don't need to. I've heard too many explanations in this life. I just wanted to look you in the eye as I watched you realize the size of the mistake you made." I calmly stood up, adjusted my jacket, and continued. "You made two mistakes, Dan. A cool and another moral. The cool thing, Sarah will take care of it. The morale, this one will accompany you for the rest of your life." He tried to say something, but his voice failed. His eyes were teary, and for the first time this arrogant man looked small, really small. I approached, put my hand on the table, and said quietly, firmly, "You played with the dignity of a man who built his own life with work. And worse, he used my daughter's love as a tool. But everything that is false one day falls. And when it falls, I hope it's up to see it." I left without looking back. In the hallway, every step I took seemed to echo more strongly. It was as if the weight that held me began to loosen, little by little. When I got to the parking lot, I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt the air enter clean, light. I had done what I needed to do. No yelling, no offense, no losing control. I just returned the truth to the place it should never have left. On the way back, the car radio played an old song, one of those that Margaret loved to sing while cooking, and for the first time I didn't miss it. I felt distance, a necessary distance, because at that moment I understood that love that becomes a weapon does not deserve mourning. It deserves oblivion. When I got home, I found Margaret on the porch, watering the lavenders. She saw me and smiled, as if nothing had happened. "Left early today, honey." I just smiled back and replied, "I had an important matter to deal with." She nodded, distracted, and went back to tending to the flowers. As I watched her, I felt a shiver run down my spine, because I knew her smile would soon change shape. The castle of lies was beginning to crumble, and she still had no idea. And the most curious thing is that the first blow would not come from me, but from whom she least expected. That night the house was plunged into a silence that seemed to have weight. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights down, and wrote something that wasn't a letter. It was an end foretold. I took the letterhead of the construction company and wrote a simple, direct, cold notification. It informed that all joint accounts would be reviewed, cards frozen, and that a full audit of the movements of the last 24 months was underway. Not a word of rancor, no charges, just facts. It was the kind of document that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. I signed it at the bottom and left it on the table, along with an envelope with copies of the new banking guidelines. Next to it, a vase of lavenders, the same one she liked so much. I closed the computer, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs with a slow but steady step. Before entering the room, I looked down the hallway one last time, and for the first time in all my years of marriage, I locked the door from the inside. Margaret arrived late. I heard the noise of the car in the garage, the sound of jumping on the wooden floor. She came in calling my name, with the same sweet and automatic tone as always. When he realized that I was not in the room, I saw through the crack in the door the reflection of the light coming on downstairs. Silence for a few seconds, and then the sound of the paper being pulled from the table. I imagined her face crumbling as I read. It rose soon after. 3 light knocks on the door. "George? Can we talk?" I kept quiet. "George, please open." "What is that?" Another pause. Then a sigh. And slow footsteps moving away. I lay on the bed with my back to the door and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. A different peace. Without joy, but with dignity. It was the weight of a right decision, even if bitter, because there are silences that scream louder than any fight. And that night my silence was my sentence. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I made coffee, sat at the table, and drank it in silence. The sound of the wall clock was the only one that filled the kitchen. When she came down, she was pale, the swollen eyes, the short breath. "George, what have you done?" he asked, his voice trembling. I got up slowly, put the cup in the sink, and replied without looking at her. "What I should have done a long time ago." I walked to the door and added calmly, "Now, it's each one with what he built." She tried to get closer, but I was already on my way to the car. "We can work this out together, dear. It was just a misunderstanding." "No, Margaret. Misunderstanding is when there is doubt, and I don't have any anymore." I closed the door behind me and left, without haste, without anger, only with the weight of what I no longer needed to carry. As I drove, I saw in the rearview mirror the house being left behind, that same house that was once our home, and was now just a concrete structure and memories. And for the first time I realized that love, when it dies, doesn't make noise. He simply ceases to be, and what remains is a kind of silence that no one hears, but that the soul understands. In the office, Marcus and Sarah were already waiting for me. I gave them the final signatures to complete the asset changes. Sarah looked at me and asked, "Are you sure you don't want me to file the formal application right now?" I replied, "Not yet. First I want to see how far she's going to pretend." Marcus nodded respectfully. "She'll try to contact her, George." I smiled, tired. "Leave it. I learned that anyone who needs to explain too much is already lost." I spent the day in meetings, but my head was far away. He came back all the time to the sound of her knocking on the door. As cruel as it was, that memory set me free. It was the end of the theater, the cut in the last thread that still held me. When I got home in the evening, I found the table set up. She had prepared dinner, lit candles, put on wine. I smelled the food, but I couldn't get inside. From the hallway, she said, "We can start over, George. I've made mistakes, but I can fix them." I stood there, looking at the scene as if observing an old painting. Beautiful, but lifeless. "You don't want to start over, Margaret. You want to erase what you've done. And I'm not the kind of man who lives on lies." She cried. He cried in a way that maybe, in another time, would shake me. But now, I only saw the despair of those who realized that the control slipped through their fingers. I went upstairs, closed the door once again, and stared at the reflection in the mirror. I looked older, but also more whole. I realized that the worst prison is the one where you pretend that everything is fine, so as not to hurt those who destroy you. And it was that night, as the clock struck 11:30, that my phone vibrated. It was a message from Brianna. Just 2 sentences. "Dad, we need to talk. I found out something about Dan. It's serious." I stared at the screen for a while, my heart heavy, and thought, maybe the truth is now finally starting to change sides. When I read Brianna's message that night, my heart sank. She never sent me something like this. "Dad, we need to talk. I found out something about Dan. It's serious." These were words that didn't come from a quiet daughter, but from someone who began to see. I replied by asking him to come home on the weekend, calmly, that we would talk in person. She agreed. He just didn't expect Margaret to have different plans. 2 days later, she appeared in the kitchen with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "George, I thought we could have a family dinner on Saturday." Calling Brianna Dan, "We need to get things back on track." The voice was too sweet, the same as the time she lied looking into my eyes. I looked at her and just said, "Sure, family dinner is always good." And that was it. On Saturday, I spent the whole day in silence, watching the house being prepared. Margaret was different, overly thoughtful, trying to bring that theater to life. New flowers on the table, polished glasses, the smell of roast mingling with the expensive perfume she always wore when she wanted to look like the perfect woman. At 7, the doorbell rang. Brianna entered with a tense face, but disguising it. Dan came right behind in a suit, as if he were going to a trial. Maybe it was. I greeted them both with a firm handshake. Nice to see you. We sit at the table. The food was good. She always knew how to cook well, but it tasted like paper. We talked about her grandson, about Brianna's work, about the company, all in a low voice with long pauses and crossed looks. It was as if each word needed permission to exist. I saw in my daughter's eyes the discomfort, that distrust that no longer fit inside her. Margaret tried to compensate, laughing too much, praising the dish, forcing a joy that sounded rehearsed. And Dan just smiled, wiggling his fork, running away from my eyes. During dinner, I watched every gesture, every breath. Margaret pouring the wine with trembling hands, Brianna trying to make sense of what was not said, and Dan wiping the sweat from his brow in a cold environment. That table, which had once been a symbol of unity, now looked like a battlefield fought in silence. I knew what was about to happen, but they didn't. And perhaps that was the hardest part, keeping my face serene when everything inside me burned. After dessert, Margaret stood up and said, "I'll pass the coffee." He went to the kitchen, and Dan, nervously, fiddled with the cell phone hidden under the table. I waited for the right moment. When she came back with the tray, I put my hand in my pocket and felt the weight of the small control. I waited for her to pour the cups. The smell of coffee spread through the air. I waited for the sound of the spoons hitting the porcelain to cease. And then, without saying anything, I connected my cell phone to the speaker in the living room. The silence that followed was almost respectful. They didn't understand it at first. The blue light flashed. The device made a slight noise, and soon after, her own voice filled the room. "As soon as the old fool signs the papers, we will have everything we planned." The sound seemed to come from within the walls. Her laugh echoed, that laugh I never forgot. Then Dan's voice, "It's going to be clean. No one will suspect it. Time has stopped." Margaret turned white. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted without sound. Dan knocked over the cup, the coffee smearing across the white tablecloth like a smear of guilt. Brianna, wide-eyed, jumped to her feet. "Mom, what is that?" No sound came out of Margaret's mouth. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come. The desperation, which she tried so hard to hide, finally showed itself. I remained seated. I didn't look at any of them. I just turned off the Bluetooth, stood up slowly, and said in a low voice, "Silence always tells the truth when words fail." I walked to the door of the room. Brianna called to me, "Dad, did you know all that?" I looked at her and replied, "It's been longer than I'd like." And I left. I left behind that frozen scenery, Margaret motionless, Dan colorless, Brianna trying to figure out what her parents' love had become. I closed the door slowly and went to the garden. I sat on the wooden bench, the same one where I had coffee with her so many times in the good times. I looked at the sky and breathed. The air was heavy, but for the first time, free. That night marked the end of the theater. I didn't have to raise my voice or explain. Truth, when it arrives, does not ask permission. It only occupies the space. And there, in that house that was no longer mine, what was left was the sound of a recording that I never needed to listen to again. No, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because what comes after this dinner, it was the moment when I realized that justice sometimes doesn't happen in the courtroom. It happens in the eyes of those who finally understand who is who. That night, before going to sleep, the phone vibrated. It was Brianna. "Dad, I need to see you tomorrow. Alone." And at that moment, I knew. The silence of that room still had a lot to say. The day after dinner, the house woke up cold. The sun had not yet pierced the curtains, and the smell of Margaret's breakfast, the same smell that had once meant home, now brought back only bitter memories. I slowly descended the stairs and found her sitting at the table, motionless with a cup in her trembling hands. He had spent the night awake, his eyes sunken, his face haggard. When he saw me, he tried to say something, but his voice failed. There were no more words that could fit there. I walked past her in silence, picked up my mug, and just said, "Brianna is coming here in a little while." And I walked out the back door, letting the cold morning wind do what words couldn't, take away the weight it had created. Brianna arrived a short time later. Her car pulled up in the driveway, and I could see her decided, hurt, confused look from afar. I went back into the kitchen, stood by the window. They stared at each other in the room, and the initial silence was almost unbearable. Margaret tried to smile, that smile of someone who still believes she can manipulate what was left. "Daughter, what you heard yesterday it was taken out of context." Brianna, teary-eyed, replied, "Mom, there's no context in the world that erases what I've heard. You said that with Dan. And the father listened to everything quietly for months." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't fear. It was disappointment. "You lied to me, Mom. He tried to use me. How am I going to look at you and believe anything again?" Margaret collapsed. He tried to explain himself. He tried to blame Dan. He tried to say that it was all a misinterpreted plan, a legal error. But the truth, when it is shown naked, does not need translation. Brianna cried but stood firm. "You destroyed the one thing I thought I would never break in our family. Trust." I stood there, behind the wall, listening to every word. The sound of their cries mixed with the ticking of the clock, and for a moment I wished that time would stop, not out of pity but out of respect for the end. Sometimes, when everything collapses, silence is the only possible tribute to what was once love. Later that afternoon, Brianna came up to me in the office. She had red eyes but a calm voice. "Dad, I want you to know that I'm on your side, and I'm sorry for everything I missed seeing." I embraced my daughter with the serenity that only comes after losing everything that is superfluous. "Daughter, the most important thing is that you have seen it now, and to see the truth, even late, is still to see." In the days that followed, things happened fast. Sarah took care of every detail. We filed the documents. The prenuptial agreement was validated without contestation. Margaret was left with only what was already in her name. Nothing more. Not a single pension. Not a penny that had not been earned legitimately. I didn't have to say a word. Her silence in front of the lawyer said it all. It was the sound of the fall. Dan, on the other hand, was hit as if taking an invisible blow. Sarah sent a copy of the financial dossier to the Iowa Bar Association. The evidence was clear. Embezzlement, misuse of third-party accounts, breach of ethics. A week later, he was suspended preventively pending disciplinary judgment. In a few days, the news spread. Contracts canceled, customers disappearing, his name stamped on local portals. I watched from afar in silence, as if watching a poorly built house collapse under its own weight. It was not revenge. It was justice. And justice, when it comes clean without hatred, is almost poetic. You know, at that point in my life, I understood something that maybe you also need to hear. Sometimes, punishment is not what we do to the other. It is what the other does to himself when the truth finally comes out. And I promise you, the most defining moment in this story was yet to come. Margaret disappeared for a few days. Brianna stayed in touch with me, worried, trying to find out where she was. I said to let time act. Sometimes silence is the only remedy that conscience accepts. When she finally returned to the city, she was different. Older, haggard, as someone who carries a shame that cannot be hidden. She came to the construction company. He entered without warning, stopped in front of me, the same perfume as before, but a look that I did not recognize. "George, I lost everything." I took a deep breath, looked her in the eye and said, "No, Margaret, you only gave back what was never yours." She cried. He cried like I've never seen before. And I just kept silent, because there was nothing left to be said. When she left, Marcus came into the room and said, "It's done, George." I looked at him and said, "No, Marcus, there is still one thing missing." And it was true. Something was missing. Something neither she, nor Dan, nor Brianna expected, because the story still had one last turn, a secret that had been hidden for years and that now finally would begin to come to light. And when it came, no one was prepared. Time has a curious way of putting everyone in their proper place. After it all came to light, Dan tried desperately to justify himself. He called Brianna every day, sent long messages full of rehearsed excuses. He said that he had been manipulated by Margaret, that it was all her idea, that he had only let himself be carried away by the influence of an older woman. Brianna, with the firmness she inherited from me and the heart that, unfortunately, she pulled from her mother, listened to everything in silence. When he finished the last attempt at defense, she replied only, "Dan, you were not manipulated, you were complicit," and he hung up. The following week, she filed for divorce. It was fast. He tried to contest, he tried to postpone, but when he realized that even his office colleagues avoided him in the corridors, that customers canceled contracts without even answering his calls, he understood that the game was over. The Bar Association officially suspended him. His name was featured in the local newspapers. and the prestige he boasted so much evaporated like cold coffee steam. The man who once thought he was smart enough to fool everyone ended up alone, with no office, no reputation, and, as far as he learned later, living with a cousin in Nebraska. Margaret also had her own punishment, and it came not in the form of scandal, but of silence. The same silence she had always ignored. After the final hearing, he sold the jewels, the Lexus, and went to live in a small rented apartment in Davenport. She went to work in a clothing store in the mall, folding pieces that looked the same as the ones she once bought in New York. The friends of the country club stopped responding to the messages, the invitations disappeared, the smiles that were once flattering now became a deviation of the gaze. She, who once believed that status and appearance were synonymous with love, learned how much emptiness weighs when the applause ends. Brianna visited me often. She didn't talk much about her mother, and I never asked. There was a wound between us that time had yet to heal, but I saw in her eyes something that gave me strength, respect, a new, mature respect that is born when the son sees the father no longer as a hero but as a human being. One day, while we were having coffee on the porch, she said to me, "Dad, I wish things had been different, but thank you for never giving up on me." I smiled, unable to answer. Sometimes the purest love is the one that expresses itself in silence, with a cup of coffee and the sun setting on the horizon. Later that same month, I received an unexpected call from the Cedar Rapids Chamber of Commerce. They wanted to honor me for the 35 years of my company, for the generation of jobs, and for the impact on the development of the city. I accepted the invitation with humility. At the ceremony, I saw familiar faces, contractors, engineers, workers who had been with me since the first brick. I went on stage, heard the applause, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of everything I experienced. When I took the microphone, I didn't talk about achievements or numbers. He only said, "No house stands if the foundation is a lie, and the same goes for life. Build with truth, even if it takes more time." There was silence, then long, sincere applause. That night I drove home slowly. The road seemed shorter than before. The gate creaked as it opened, and the house greeted me with the familiar noise of trees in the yard. I took off my jacket, went to the backyard, and started to take care of my small vegetable garden. I planted tomatoes as my father did when I was a boy. The smell of wet earth, the sound of crickets in the distance. It was a peace that no money can buy. There, with my hands dirty with dirt and my heart clean of resentment, I realized that forgiveness is not a gift we give to the other. It's a shelter that we build for ourselves. From time to time, I saw Margaret passing by on the street when she went to the market. She looked away, and so did I. Not out of contempt, but because there was nothing left to be said. The love we had died the same way it was born, in silence. Only this time, silence was not a promise. It was the end. Life found its own rhythm. The construction company prospered under the command of young engineers I had trained. I stayed away from the big meetings. I left the decisions in their hands. I started to dedicate more time to the garden, to books, to Sunday lunches with Brianna and her grandson. And when the boy ran around the yard laughing, I thought, that's why I endured everything, to ensure that he grew up in a more honest world than the one I was supposed to. Time took away the pain, but it left the lesson. And if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that no one deceives the truth for long. It may take time, but it always arrives. And when it arrives, it comes with the calm and strength of a storm foretold. But fate still had one last move in store, something I didn't expect, because a year after all this, I received a letter, handwritten, with her name on the sender, Margaret. And inside that envelope, more than words, there was a confession, one that would change once again the way I saw this whole story. The letter arrived on a cold November morning. The envelope was simple, with no visible sender, but the handwriting, oh, I would recognize those lyrics from afar. The G is too curved, the R is unhurried, the I dot is made carefully, as if not wanting to be forgotten. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at that piece of paper for long minutes before it opened. The sound of the paper tearing was almost symbolic, as if I were opening once again a wound that I had already learned to let heal. Inside, there were 3 pages, handwritten. "George," she began, "I don't know what made me write. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's the fear of leaving life without telling the truth. Or maybe simply the need for someone to know what I also lost." She said that yes, she had allowed herself to be poisoned by pride, vanity, the need to feel control over something that no longer existed between us. She spoke of Dan with contempt, as if she now saw him with the eyes I had always tried to open on her. I admitted that the plan was never just about money, it was about punishing me for becoming so distant. You closed yourself off, George. You became the man I said I admired, but who, deep down, made me feel small. I made a mistake trying to hurt you, and I got hurt with it. I read each line with the calm of someone who no longer seeks answers. She said that she had dreamed of me walking among the houses we had built together, and that in the dream, I looked at her, but said nothing. That's when I realized, she wrote, that silence has always been her form of love, and mine of punishment. In the end, a request, not of forgiveness, but of peace. If I don't have any more time, I hope you find what I looked for in the wrong places. Rest. And if you can, George, don't hate me, because loving wrong is also a kind of love, even if it hurts. I closed the envelope and placed it on the table. I didn't cry. I think the tears had dried a long time ago, but I felt a lump in my throat. Not from pain, but from recognition. Because there, at the end of it all, I understood what had always eluded me. Sometimes people hurt us not because they don't love, but because they don't know how to love in any other way. That afternoon, I went for a walk. The streets of Cedar Rapids were covered with dry leaves, and the wind blew with that faint sound of someone who doesn't want to disturb. I passed in front of houses that I helped to build with my own hands. I remembered the times when every brick seemed like a promise, and I realized how, throughout life, we build more than walls. We build stories, we build people, and sometimes we need to see everything collapse to understand the value of a foundation. I walked unhurriedly, watching the people on the sidewalks, the families leaving the supermarkets, the dogs running in the yards. Everything seemed more alive, simpler. The world had not changed. I was the one who had changed. The anger, the resentment, the pride, all were left behind, like the wreckage of an old house. What remained now was a kind of brute peace, unpleasant, but solid, a clarity that only comes when the pain has already screamed everything it had to say. I returned home at the end of the day. The sun set behind the trees, tinting the sky orange and gold. I sat on the porch, in the shabby coat Brianna gave me last Christmas, and watched her grandson playing on the lawn. He ran after a ball, laughing out loud without imagining what his grandfather had already carried in his chest. And I thought, maybe that's how the cycle closes, when the laughter of those who come after erases the echo of our wounds. In the evening, I sat in the office and wrote a letter to Brianna. I started slowly, choosing the words like someone who plants seeds. Daughter, I don't want you to choose sides, neither mine nor hers. Life is too short to spend on judgments. I just want you to know that true love doesn't lie, nor does it pretend. He doesn't have to prove anything. He just remains. The rest, time takes. I wrote to the end and signed with the same pen I used in the first contract of the construction company so many years ago. Folded, the letter seemed light, but it carried a lifetime inside it. Then I went to the closet, took a small wooden box and opened it. Inside were the flash drive with the recordings, the envelope of her letter, and some old photos. Me and Margaret on the day of the house's opening, little Brianna on my shoulders, the times when the smile was still sincere. I put it all together, closed the lid and wrote with pen on the label, "Past." I locked the box and kept it in the safe where no one else would touch it. I felt a strange relief, as if finally giving back to time what it no longer needs to carry. And that night, before turning off the light, I looked in the mirror and saw a different man. Not the businessman, not the betrayed, not the avenger. Just an ordinary man who survived his own pain and learned to walk lightly, even after so much weight. But fate, stubborn as it always was with me, still had one last surprise in store. Because that morning, while the wind was blowing on the window and I was trying to sleep, I heard a noise coming from the balcony. A car stopped. Slow footsteps approached the door, and a soft voice, almost a whisper, called my name. George. When I heard that voice whispering my name on the porch, I stood still for a few seconds. The heart, already tired of startles, hesitated between fright and tenderness. I got up slowly, opened the door, and there she was. Margaret, aged, haggard, with teary eyes and trembling hands. She didn't say anything for a few moments, just looked at me as if looking for a memory in the midst of ruins. "George," she murmured, "I needed to see you, not to ask for anything, just to thank you for being you, even when I didn't know how to be me." I was silent. The same silence that she once called coldness was now the only way to say that everything was resolved. I offered a bench in the garden. We sat side by side, and for a few minutes there was no past or future, just two old men watching time go by. When she got up to leave, she said, "I hope you have found what you were looking for." She smiled, a tired smile, and replied, "I found, when I stopped looking," and he left. That was the last day I saw her. Today, years later, life is simple again, and maybe that's what she always wanted to teach me, even in the crooked way she chose. The house remains the same, but now breathes lightness. The walls no longer remind me of the pain, but of how much I was able to resist. Margaret took the cutlery, the carpets, and even the silverware, but she didn't take my peace. Brianna is still going strong, raising her son with love, and I sometimes spend Sundays at her house helping her grandson set up small wooden houses. He looks at me curiously and always asks, "Grandpa, what's the hardest house you've built?" And I smile, put my hand on his shoulder, and answer, "The one inside, my son. The one inside was the most difficult of all." Today I understand that life is not made to be perfect. It is made to be felt. That love, even when it breaks us, is still what teaches us to be whole. And that forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened, but about remembering without pain. I don't hold a grudge against anyone. Anger would leave me stuck in what has already happened. And I learned that freedom begins when we decide to let go of what no longer fits inside the heart. You know, I didn't tell this story to relive wounds. I told him to put on record that no suffering is useless. Everything teaches, everything shapes, everything pushes us forward, even if it's by force. And if you have come this far with me, I thank you from the heart. Really. Because sharing this story was like breathing again. If you want to give me a hug now, give me a like. It warms your heart and helps keep this little corner alive. And if you want to come back for another coffee, subscribe here to the channel. This space is for us to talk, to remember that we are not alone on this path. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching. I love to imagine where these words are going in every corner of this huge country. And don't forget to activate the bell, so you don't miss it when the coffee is ironed again. Today, when I walk the streets of Cedar Rapids and see the houses I have built, I no longer feel nostalgia or regret. I feel gratitude for everything, for the pain he taught me, for the silence that saved me, and for the peace I built myself. Because in the end, I just wanted to be loved as I did, and somehow I think I was. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.